Hello there, this is Dimitris Christou, and I'm back with yet another one Blender video tutorial. It's been a while, but this time around we'll again be trying to build something nice using Blender. So let's begin. I have the default cube here selected, and I hold down the Shift key to select the lamp and hit the X key to delete them both. And what I'll do now is hit Shift A and add text. Okay, let's move over to the text object data. Let's modify our text a bit, and first thing I'll do for my text is to center it, and now I'll hit the tab key to switch from object to edit mode. And when we are switching to edit mode in a text object, we can modify it. We can type our own text, and let's type in this, or perhaps clip made by, and okay. And as you can see, I'm again using the default Blender font. Feel free to change this one to use your own fonts. I'm just doing this so that everyone can follow this tutorial, and I'm going to modify my text a bit more. We have the offset value here, and I'll bring this one down, and I'll make my text here a bit thinner. Let's set it down to -0.01. okay, looking good. I'll add a material to my text here, so switch over to the material and click new. Let's call this one text. Pretty simple material. I'll bring the diffuse to a solid white, bring the diffuse intensity up, the specular intensity down, and I'll set the mid value for the shading up to 1. And we want a bright material, a bright white material for our text here. Okay. Now I'll hit 0 to switch to camera perspective view on my mirror keypad, and click the right mouse button to select this frame and therefore select my camera, and I'll hit Shift S and selection to grid. Okay, I'm just snapping my camera position to the grid. You can see here that we are having some nice round values for location, and I'll change them a bit. Change the Y here to -6, the X, let's set this one to 6 as well, and I'll set the Z value, let's set it to 3 or perhaps 4, and let's move a bit closer on the Y axis. I'll set Y to -5.5. okay, and I'll change the rotation. Let's set the X rotation to 65, the Y to 0, and let's set the Z rotation to 45. Okay, now we got our camera set up. It's looking at our text using this, we got this little angle here that looks pretty nice. And next thing I'll do for my camera is set the focal point, and I want to have the focal point of the camera close to the text so that the text is in focus. First thing I'll do is change the focal length. Let's change it a bit. From 35 I'll set it to 30, and we want to display the limits of the camera, so we're having this little yellow cross, and this cross is the focus point. And let's increase the distance, and let's take a good look, and I think we're good at about 9. okay, alright. Now I'll hit 0 on my mirror keypad to switch to camera perspective view again, and what I'll do is split my 3D view and change the top 3D view into a node editor. Okay, I'll hit the N key to make this properties window here go away, and I want to use compositing nodes and click use nodes. As always, we're getting a render layers node and composite node. Let's move them to the side, and I'll hit Shift A and add output viewer node. We need a viewer node so we can check out our work with the compositing nodes. And time to add our nodes. I'll hit Shift A and add filter a, let's add a defocus node. Okay, I'm clicking and dragging and connecting the render layers, putting the defocus node in the middle of the render layers and the composite node. And of course we have to also make the output of the defocus node an input for the viewer so we can see what we're doing. And I'll also check backdrop. Okay, what you also have to do is render a frame. Looking good, but what I want to do now is move over to the world options and change the horizon color to a solid black color, and let's render again. Okay. Now we will modify our defocus node here. Let's take the Z value, the Z output from the render layers, and make it an input for the defocus node. And we're doing this because we want our Z value to use the focal point that we've set before, and this is close to the text. And I'll check use Z buffer because we want to use the Z buffer. We just connected it, and I'll end check preview. And what I'll do now is change the f-stop value. Let's set it down to say 8 or perhaps 6. And as you can see, we're getting off focus here on our text, and I think this one looks pretty nice so far. We might modify the defocus node later on, but I think it's pretty good for now. And what I'll also do is hit Shift A and add filter a glare node, and again clicking and dragging, and this time I'll bring the glare node right between the defocus and the viewer, and as you can see we can connect it now. And I won't be using streaks as a glare type. I'll be using fog glow, and I'll bring the threshold down. And we're bringing the threshold down because we want our effect to be applied even to some pixels that are not super bright. And as you can see, as I'm bringing the threshold down to 0.8, we have the fog glow effect kicking in, and I think again that we're good as it is. Now I want another glare node, and instead of hitting Shift A and adding a new node, I have the glare node selected, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it and connect this one as well. Okay, and this time around we'll change from fog glow, let's change to ghosts. We have our ghost effect appearing, and let's increase the threshold to this one. Let's make our effect a bit less stronger. Okay, and I think we're good at about there. And I also think that we're having some corners here and some parts of our text that appear some sort of pixel pattern, so we're going to add some simple and slight blur. I'll hit Shift A and add filter blur, connect this one, and I'll switch it from Gaussian to fast Gaussian, and let's set the X and Y to 1. As I said before, we want a slight blur. Let's change the X to 2 perhaps. Okay, looking good. And let's move on with our compositing nodes. I'll hit Shift A and add distort lens distortion node, click and drag, and for this one we will check projector and increase the dispersion value here. Let's set it up to 0.2. Okay, and we will duplicate the lens distortion node here, hit Shift D and connect this one as well. And this time around we won't be using projector, we'll be using fit. Okay, and we could bring the dispersion down a bit. Let's set it to 0.15. Okay, and this is what we get. I think that our compositing nodes are look that way more or less. We might modify them later on. Let's move into building the animation. So I'm expanding my 3D viewport here, and what I'll do now is select my text, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it and hit Y to move it on the Y axis, and I'll hit the Tab key to modify my text. So we get clip made by Dimitris. Or perhaps let's use Dimitris space and Christou. Okay, hitting the Tab key to switch back to object mode, and our text here, let's hit R and Y to rotate it on the Y axis. Let's rotate it for 90 degrees on the Y axis, for minus 90, excuse me, and let's hit perhaps G and Y. Okay, and now I'll hit G and Z to grab and move my text on the Z axis. Okay, and now G and X to grab and move my text on the X axis. I'll hit 7 to take a look through the top author view, and I'll hit G and X. Let's bring this one closer, and you can see what we want to get here. Okay, so moving on, we have clip made by Dimitris Christou, and again Shift D and Z and Y, and I'm moving my new text on the Y axis so I can clearly see what I'm typing in. Hit the Tab key, and for, don't know why it keeps ignoring my first letter. Okay, for his blog, Tab, and I'm hitting 7, Z and Y, grab on the Y axis, and let's bring this one up as well, G and Z. Okay, 7, I'll hit R to rotate it. Okay, and hit Z to grab it, and let's move it a bit more, Z to grab, at about there. I think we're good. Okay, and let's perhaps rotate it on the Z axis, or perhaps not. Okay, let's leave it that way. Okay, we got a clip made by Dimitris Christou for his blog, and let's create another one. Shift D and GY, and this is a slightly boring part of the tutorial. Of course, you're free to use your own text to make it all work, and let's type in the blog address, or perhaps let's simply make it blend bend, and again it ignores my first letter anyway, blendbend.com. Okay, Tab key for this one, and let's move it, hit the G key to grab it, and G and Z to move it on the Z axis, G and Z, move it a bit more. Okay, and I think they're touching right now, and I don't want that, so let's perhaps hit R and Y, rotate on the Y axis for minus 90 degrees, and then Z and Z, grab and move it on the Z axis, and let's bring this one closer, Z and X, okay, and Z and Z to grab and move on the Z axis, okay. So I'm hitting 0 on my numeric keypad to switch to camera perspective view, and let's render an image to take a look. And of course, in order to have everything, the compositing nodes appearing and affecting our render, what you have to do is take the output from the final compositing node, and for our setup here it's the lens distortion node, and make it an input for the composite node. And now if we click render and so hide render view, you can see the final image. So I'm hitting the escape key to move back to my node editor, and I think I want a bit more of this fog glow, and let's bring the f-stop down to, let's say, 5, okay, and down to 4, let's see, okay, alright, let's keep it that way. And now it's time for the animation. Okay, now what we want for our text, and we have set the frame rate to be 30 frames per second. What we want for our text here is to look for our text for an entire second, and that means we'll be keeping our camera still from frame 1 to frame 30. And let's move over to the object data for the camera. Let's select the camera, and what we want for frame 30 is to insert a location and rotation keyframe for the camera. I'm hitting the I key and insert keyframe for location and rotation. Now we're at frame 30. We've been looking at our text here for 30 frames for 1 second, and what I now want is to have my camera moving and changing the position and looking at the second part, at the second text in 10 frames. So now what I'm doing is selecting this text here, and I try to move my camera at about here. I want to be able to see my text. So Control Alt and 0 to roughly position my camera here, and then select it. Let's change our values for the location and rotation. Let's set the X here to -1.5, and I want some rotation about there, okay, and make this one up, okay, and you have to fiddle with the settings here a bit in order to get a nice little angle for your keyframe. Let's set this one to 35 and this one to -30, okay, perhaps 36, okay, the Y value to -4.5 and the Z to 12, okay. And I think this is quite good. I'll hit the I key to insert, and this time around I'm inserting a keyframe using the interface. I'm keeping my cursor over the location values here and hitting the I key to insert the keyframe. You can instantly see that this turns from green to yellow. Let's see it again for the rotation. I have the cursor over the rotation and hitting the I key to insert the keyframe for the rotation for frame 40. Okay. Let's render another image to take a look. And you see the good thing about it is that we have the focal point here and roughly positioned close to our text, and we're having some parts of text that are in good focus and they look sharp and bright and all, while we're having other parts of the text looking, you know, blurry and stuff like that. And of course what you can also do is as I did before with hitting the I key and inserting keyframes for location and rotation, you can also set some keyframes for the depth of field distance. For example, I could over this frame move my distance a bit further away to be close to the text, but I won't be bothered with this with that at the moment. Feel free to do it on your own projects. And again, pretty simple. Insert the keyframe and then insert another keyframe and bring the distance, the focal point, closer to your text. Okay, now I'm hitting 0 for the camera perspective view, and as I said before, we want to have an entire second just staying at our text and giving the time for the viewers to watch the clip and read the text. So from frame 40 and for 30 frames to frame 70, excuse me, we want to stay still, so I'm hitting the I key and insert a location rotation keyframe for the camera. As you can see, we have this frame selected, and that means that our camera is selected. Okay, now we have our camera still for 1 second, and we want in 10 frames, that means from frame 70 to frame 80, to move to our next text. And let's do that. I'm selecting the for his blog text, and let's try to take a good look. Okay, and again selecting the camera now and changing the transform values. Minus 5.5 for the X, and again feel free to use your own values, your own settings. You'll probably have to, whether you like it or not. Okay, let's set the X rotation to 30 and the Y, let's set it to -9, and let's set the Z to 46 perhaps. Let's move it the other way. Let's set the Z rotation to 50, and let's see where our focal point is. Okay, instead of animating the focal point, we'll move our camera up a bit more and set the Z value, the Z position, to be at 14. Okay, and time to insert another location rotation keyframe for the camera. I'll hit the I key for location and the I key to insert keyframe for rotation for frame 80. Okay, and as we did before, we'll have to stay still for 1 second for 30 frames, and so we'll stay still until frame 110, and I'm hitting the I key to insert a location rotation keyframe. Okay, and now we have to move to frame 120 and then take a look at our final text, which is this one. And let's try to take a good look at our blog address here. I'll hit Ctrl Alt and 0 and roughly position my camera. Let's select it and let's modify the values again. Let's set the X to 1, the Y to -7, and let's bring this one to 16, and let's move away a bit, 0 or perhaps -1. Okay, and let's increase the X rotation, set it to 40, let's say 47, and let's set the Y to -20. Okay, then I'm setting the Z rotation to -40, and then let's move a bit away on the Y axis. Let's set it to -8 and move up a bit, 17, and then bring the X rotation down, and the Z rotation, let's set it at about here, and again fine-tuning the keyframe position. So I think this looks pretty nice. I'll hit the I key to insert a location rotation keyframe for frame 120, and let's see our focal point, and our focal point is way off. So let's set a keyframe for the focal point. I said it before, let's set one, it's pretty easy. And we have the distance set to 9 for frame 110. I'll hit the I key to insert a keyframe, and then move up to frame 120 where we have our camera focusing on the blendbed.com text. And for this one we will bring the distance down. Let's set it from 9 to 8, or perhaps even 7. Okay, and then hit the I key to insert a new keyframe, a new distance value for frame 120. Okay, I'm hitting 0 for the camera perspective view and hitting F12 to render an image. Okay, and as I said before, you are free to use your own text and create your own cool clips and messages. And I'll do one more thing here. I don't think it's crucial for the clip, but I think it will add some nice variation, some nice motion. You'll see in a while. So I'll hit Shift A and I will add empty and select plane axis. Okay, we have our empty here. I'll hit 1 on my mirror keypad, or perhaps let's try to move it that way. And I want to move my empty roughly at the center of my text construct here. So I'll hit Z and Z. Let's grab and move the empty on the Z axis, and I'm roughly trying to position this to my text center, sort of. Okay, let's say that we're at about here. Okay, what I'll do now is select my text, hold down the hit the right mouse button and hold down the Shift key to select them all. Okay, and finally select the empty, and again I'm holding down the Shift key and then hit Control P and set parent to object. So now the empty is the parent of our text objects here. Okay, and what I want to do for this empty here is hit the I key and insert a rotation keyframe. And feel free to, or perhaps let's undo and let's set the rotation keyframe to frame 1. I mean, it doesn't matter if you set the rotation keyframe to frame 120, but let's keep it all nice and tidy and insert our keyframe for the empty at frame 1. So hitting the I key and inserting a rotation keyframe. Okay, and what I'll now do is change my node editor here into a graph editor, and we have the rotation for our empty, and it is currently a flat line since we only have a keyframe for frame 1. And what we'll do for my for our graph editor here is hit the N key, and we're going to select the X rotation, and we have the properties here, and what we want is to add a modifier, and we'll add a noise modifier. Okay, and you can see the noise applied on our X rotation graph, and it creates this little messy waveform here. And in order to make it, you know, less profound and less powerful as an effect, I'll increase the scale value and make it 4, and I'll bring the strength down to 0.02. Let's set it to a pretty low value because we only want a slight rotation for our empty here. And by rotating the empty, you can imagine that we will also slightly rotate our text, and I think this will look pretty nice in the end result. Okay, now selecting the Y rotation, and again adding a noise modifier, set the scale to 4 and the strength to 0.02, and I'll change the phase just to get a different waveform, and I don't want to have the same rotation that the X rotation uses, so I'll change the phase to 5, and as you can see, we're now having a different noise applied to our graph, to our rotation. And let's do this again with the Z rotation, and add a noise modifier and bring the scale. Let's bring this one up to 4 and the strength down to 0.02, and I'll change the phase for this one to, let's say, 12. And again, you can see that we're getting different noise applied to our X, Y and Z rotation, which is exactly what we want. Okay, let's now switch our graph editor into a node editor. Let's see our nodes, and I'm hitting 0 on my memory keypad, and we have the camera perspective view, and I'm hitting play to see the animation, and you can see that the noise creates some nice little, perhaps odd motion for our clip. And if you want to, you can always move over to the graph editor and say change the strength. Let's bring this one down to 0.01 for the y-axis, for the z-axis, excuse me, and 0.01 for the y-axis, and let's set it to 0.015 for the x-axis. Let's lower it down a bit, and again make this one a node editor window again. Okay, back to frame 1. Let's hit play. Okay, and feel free to modify the noise that rotates our empty and therefore the text. So this is pretty much it. We want to render 150 frames for our animation, and since we're moving to the final camera position at frame 120, and as we said, we want 30 frames for our camera to stay still and be able to let us read the text. So we're not inserting any keyframe. We want our camera to stay at the current position, and we will just render from frame 1 to 150 for our clip. And again, as I said before, feel free to move on, use more text, use more messages, like your website, like or some messages you want to send to a friend, or make an intro for a clip. And this is our little video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I really did. Let's save it. Click File, Save As. Let's save it as tut text. Okay, and click Save as Blender file. And of course, I'll be rendering some clips, and as you can see, since we're using simple object and this is a pretty simple scene, the render is also very fast. Okay, so this is it. This is Dimitris Christou, and thanks for watching.